All right, so I'm not going to beat around the bush. This section that I'm going to go through is review, so I'm not going to do much in it. I'm actually just going to go over the questions, so it's going to be pretty quick. In fact, I'm going to combine marriage and sexuality, which is on pages 207 to 211, with the sins against marriage on pages 211 to 217, because it's review of stuff that we did in the chapter on sacrament of marriage. I'll go a little bit more in depth on some of the sins against marriage, but I don't know that you guys need a ton of me kind of talking at you. So I'm going to go over the questions, and then I'm going to very quickly take a look at a couple of things, and we'll call it a day. So, your questions for the first part, pages 207 to 211, marriage and sexuality. What is the unitive aspect of sexuality? What is the procreative aspect of sexuality? Uh, the unitive aspect of sexuality is the expression of complementary love between the husband and wife that renews their marital covenant. It is where the two become one. It is where they give that complete gift of self to other, where they don't hold anything back. Everything that they are, they give to the other. The procreative purpose, of course, is the begetting of new life. It's sometimes referred to as fecundity, that is fertility. And it is cooperating with God, who infuses a unique human soul at that moment of conception, where the husband and wife join together as one through the conjugal act. The second question, the exclusivity and indissolubility of marriage. Those are the two essential properties. So we have the two um, aspects, unitive and procreative. We have the two properties of marriage, exclusivity and indissolubility. Exclusivity, of course, means that it is one man, one woman. Indissolubility is that they are married as long as they are both alive. Period. The end. Third question, what does the marital act communicate according to the theology of the body? And again, if you need some help with this one, I can post a video starring Father Hadi Mike Schmitz, and it's a good one. He just kind of goes over it, but you guys have seen it already, so I don't know that I need to repost it for you. I'll double check to make sure that it's on the class page and available to you. But when we look at the theology of the body, it's basically, when we look at it, how it relates to the marital act, it's this. Since man and woman possess body and soul, the physical union between the two must always mirror the spiritual union expressed in the faithful and total commitment of the marital covenant. So what does it mean? It means that when it comes to the conjugal act, it is exclusive, right? That it is uh, not exclusive, that it is open, it is unitive, that it is procreative, exclusive, indissoluble, all that stuff. So you're sharing it with your spouse and your spouse only, that you are always open to the total gift of self from your spouse. You're totally open to the possibility of children every time you engage in the marital act. There you go. New thing that I did want to talk about for this one before we move on to the next section, the section called Marriage and Sexuality on page 209. And when we look at it, it does speak to, I think, a common misunderstanding that people have when it comes to how the Catholic Church, what the Catholic Church believes about sexuality. Um, they often think we have what's called the puritanical view. We have these two kind of extremes, and the church is neither of them, the puritanical view and the self-centered approach. In the puritanical view, sexual passion and attraction are a result of original sin, and it means that sex is bad, it's distasteful. It may be necessary for procreation, but it and marriage are, by original sin, sinful, right? The other kind of extreme, self-centered, which is really the extreme that I think we find the world in, is that sex is for self-gratification, self-pleasure. And unfortunately, what it means is the mystery, respect, and sacredness of sexuality and marriage are replaced by hedonism, irreverence, casualness. And I think we see this in the world we live in, admittedly sex kind of saturated world in which sex has really lost its sacred meaning, its holiness. The church says both of those kind of extremes are wrong. And the Catholic understanding view of sex is it's inherently very good, right? Sex is inherently very good, but it has to be expressed according to God's plan. That is, within its proper context, which of course is marriage. And the meaning is simply is this: all the implications of sexuality apply, right? It has to be open to the unitive. It has to be open to the procreative. It has to be part of an indissoluble and exclusive marriage, right? And so sex is good when you are open to the creation of new life, procreative. When you are giving that complete gift of self to your spouse, right, the unitive. When it is exclusive between you and your spouse only, right? And when it is with that spouse who you're with for life. Next section, pages 211 to 217. Again, this is all stuff that we've talked about. So again, I don't necessarily feel like I need to get too much into any of the nitty gritty because we've talked about most of it. 3 questions. I'm going to again address them very quickly. What are the primary sins against marriage? How is NFP, natural family planning, different from contraception? And third, what is responsible parenthood? Again, these are all things we've talked about, so I'm just going to kind of give them to you and then go over a couple of other things. Primary sins against marriage: adultery, divorce, right? When we look at them, primary sins against marriage because they go against the aspects of marriage, exclusivity and indissolubility. In the case of divorce, it's against indissolubility, right? It's attempting to civilly dissolve something which God has created and cannot be dissolved. And adultery is against exclusivity. So divorce, indissolubility, and adultery, exclusivity. Second question, how is NFP different from contraception? And we've talked about this a lot. So when we look at NFP, as we've said before, NFP is always open to the reality, is open to the possibility of life, right? Now, they take steps in terms of doing their best to lessen, right, the possibility of generating new life in terms of what they do. It does involve periodic abstinence with your spouse in those times where you are most likely to get pregnant, but never is it completely shutting off the possibility, or is that even the end that you're seeking. The end is always unitive and open to the possibility of procreative, but you're not saying no, right? Whereas contraception is a very overt no to that aspect of marriage, or of the marital act. Third question, responsible parenthood. What is responsible parenthood? And this relates to NFP, right? NFP, when is it applicable? Well, as a responsible parent, you have the right to determine, in part, right, family size for serious reasons using moral means. And we've talked about some of those. For example, changes in the ability for the spouse to make kind of moral decisions, i.e. there's some type of impairment, physical things like, having another child could put you in great risk of dying, et cetera, et cetera. So those are all things that can be part of the understanding and those can all be part of the reasoning behind use of natural family planning. That's what I was going for. Some of the other sins against marriage that we need to know: polygamy, incest, free union, trial marriage, contraception, and all of those in some way, shape, or form are violations of either the exclusive, indissoluble, or against the procreative or unitive aspects or ends of marriage. Polygamy is obviously against the exclusive. It means having more than one spouse. Incest is intimate relation between someone that should not be having intimate relationships, someone other than your spouse. But in this case, it's more egregious because it's somebody that you're related to or an in-law. And if you want to know who you're prohibited from doing that with, you can look in your sacraments book. I don't really feel like getting into it now, but like we're talking about first cousins, aunts, uncles, parents, ugh, children, ugh, brothers, sisters, ugh, 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 it's all gross. And not only is it a sin directly against marriage, it's also a violation in many ways against the fifth commandment in terms of respecting the dignity of the human person and against the idea of family itself. So, yeah, it's particularly egregious. Free union, trial marriage are both related to each other. Free union, we refer to it as cohabitation, the last one. It's basically availing yourselves of all of the kind of benefits, if you will, in terms of sexual relationship, of living together with a person with no intention of getting married, as opposed to trial marriage, which is the exact same thing, only with the intention of possibly getting married one day. For both of them, the reality is what we've seen statistically in terms of marriage success is it's not good in terms of helping a person stay together with another person. Beyond just the fact that it's a flaunting of the actual institution and sacrament of marriage. Divorce, already talked about. Contraception, already talked about. Artificial insemination. And of course, that is a violation of the marital act itself. It is intending conception outside of marriage. We're talking about things like in vitro fertilization or reproductive cloning. It offends the unitive purpose of the marital act and often also violates the fifth commandment as well, the sanctity of human life. And it is also a sexual sin because when we talk about artificial insemination, it involves and requires masturbation. So there you go. It's also a violation as far as that goes as well. And it can actually involve clinical adultery. And you're saying to yourself, what the heck is clinical adultery? It means non-spousal sperm and egg donors and surrogate mothers. That is technically a form of adultery. I mean, without the quote-unquote fun of the sexual act, but there you go. It still is that as well. There's a whole lot of other stuff wrong with it, and we don't need to get into that too much because we did talk about that in the last chapter, actually. One other thing that I want to quickly talk about, and that is direct sterilization. I did not talk about this in the last unit, but direct sterilization, indirect sterilization. Direct sterilization of things like vasectomies and hysterectomies, they are sinful. You are cutting yourself off from, quite literally, the ability to procreate. Indirect sterilization is not the same thing. So if you get a hysterectomy, for example, and it is the byproduct of like them having to cut out a cancerous tumor in your fallopian, your fallopian tubes, that is what we refer to as indirect sterilization. So it goes to the ends of what you're talking about, right? We talked about means and ends. So the end in this case is not sterilization. That's not what you're seeking. You're seeking the end of cancer, and an indirect outcome is sterilization. So we need to be careful. Direct sterilization is intended, right? The means are probably sometimes the same, but the end that you're seeking, the intention, is bad, right? In this case, you're seeking out the ability or seeking out the inability, if you will, to procreate. So legitimate intentions, right, on the part of the spouses do not justify recourse to morally unacceptable means, right? So, for example, like you might seek out a vasectomy or a hysterectomy so that like you don't have more children because you already have as many as you can handle financially. Well, that is not a morally acceptable reason to do it, right? Um, but a morally acceptable reason that sterilization might happen, again, is as a side effect, right, of a very licit and morally responsible choice of seeking to save your own life via not having a cancerous tumor. Okay. Um, do I have anything else that we need to talk about? I don't think so. We don't need to talk about annulments because you guys know what those are. Um, yeah, I don't think there's anything else that we need to talk about in this. The only other thing that I just wanted to kind of talk about really quickly is quizzes and tests. Um, I'm just going to point this out to you, right? If you have kind of habitually gotten like 70s and 80s and 90s, or well, 70s and 80s on quizzes and tests, and somehow now are miraculously getting like hundreds and fives, right? That's not a good cheating, right? You should at least be somewhat close to where you were in the first place. But be like, come on, be better than that. Put your own work out there. I'm not saying that all of you guys are doing it, because not all of you are, but come on. And I'm also going to say this, a lot more of the tests and quizzes are going to be kind of directly related to stuff that I say in these videos. So if you're not watching them, it might be difficult when you get to your quiz or on Wednesday or your test the following Friday. That's all I'm going to say. See you guys on Monday. Have a good weekend. Bye.